So welcome to the 2024 chemistry 50/70. If you are doing pure science, this is your paper for 2024. Let's look at F4. This is under more concept. It says a grade 12 learner investigates the value of N in the hydrated crystal copper 2 hydrate. We don't know the number of water using gravimetric analysis. The crystals were gently heated just to remove the water of crystallization. All right. The following data was obtained. So number of experiment, the mass of the hydrate salt, the salt with water, and the anhydrous, the salt without water. They gave us, like that. Then it actually says, use experiment 1 to determine the value N, in this, hydrate salt. Use the mist of copper as 160 and the mist of water as 18. So they have actually even simplified, for us in this case, because they have actually given us, the misters in this case. Yeah, so if you look at there, in the first one, using experiment 1, I just need to know mass of, water that was lost. So the mass of water lost will be, in this case, 25.0 minus 16.0, which is there, which in this case will give me, 9.0 grams. So once you do that, now you need to convert that to the number of moles. So you need to find the number of moles, you need to find moles of, copper 2 sulfate. So how many moles of copper 2 sulfate? Moles, remember, is mass divided by mister. So the mass of the copper, the anhydrous, is simply 16.0 divided by the mister, which they gave us 160. Like I told you, this question was actually even more simplified because we didn't need to struggle. So it will be 16 divided by 160, and that will give me 0.10 moles. So these are the number of moles of copper. Then we also need to find moles of, H2O, which is simply the mass times divided by the mister. Sorry, the mass of the water, remember, it is simply 9.0 divided by 18, which they have already given you. So it will be 9 divided by 18, and that will give you 0.5 moles. Now, for you to find the value of N, for you to get N, you just need to use the mole ratio. So the number of moles, N, will now be given by, you need just to look at moles of, the water. So the moles of the water divided by moles of the copper 2 sulfate. Obviously, you are following me. So the moles of water is 0.5 mole divided by the moles of the copper, which is 0.10 mole. So what is that going to give you? So it will be 0.5 divided by 0.1, and that is going to give you, that will give you 5 in this case. So the value of N in this case is equal to 5. Now, if the value of N is equal to 5, it simply means that the formula of the salt was simply copper 2 sulfate pentahydrate, or 5 water. That's what it simply means there. Hopefully you are following that. Then B says, using your answer in A, show that the data obtained in experiment 1 is consistent with the data in experiment 2. So to show that it is actually consistent with what we have, what we are going to do, we are simply going to do again the same. So I'm going to find, in this case, mass of the H2O that was lost by simply, I'm now using experiment 2. So it is going to be 10.0 minus 6.4. So it is going to be, in this case, 10 minus 6.4. And what is that going to give me? It is simply going to give me 3.6 grams. So that is the mass of the water that was lost. So we basically have to do the same thing in this case. So I'll just say number of moles of the copper 2 sulfate to be, like we said, it's the mass. So what's the mass of the copper? It is mass over mister. So the mass is simply 6.4 divided by 160. So it will be 6.4 divided by 160, which is simply going to give you 0.04 moles of copper. Then the number of moles of the H2O, again, mass over Mr. So the mass is 3.6 divided by 18. So it is 3.6 divided by 18. So it is going to give me 0.2 moles. So therefore, N would be equal to, so it's the number of moles of the H2O divided by the number of moles of the copper 2 sulfate. So the number of moles of the water is 0.2 mole divided in this case by 0.04 mole. So let's try to work out that. So 0.2 divided by 0.04. If you notice again, you are again having 5, meaning that the results are actually consistent. The results are actually consistent. So that's what it simply means. Then let's look at the last question for this one. It says calculate the mass of copper 2 sulfate in 5 grams of copper 2. So since we know this one here, it's now copper 2 sulfate pentahydrate, or if you want you can say 5 water, there's no problem. Please, if you are struggling, you can check out my other videos. I've actually done questions on how you can calculate on hydrates. Go to the chemistry playlist, then you'll be able to learn more of these more concept questions. I've actually done a whole lot of them. So what we are going to do, we can calculate the Mr. Of this hydrate salt. Now obviously for copper 2 sulfate, I have already been given 160, so I will not waste time. So then the water here, you treat it as 1, but there are 5 water, so it is 5 times what? 18. I believe that will give us 90. 5 times 18 is 90 plus 160. So if we add this plus that, the Mr of the whole of this compound is simply 250. So therefore, we are going to say mass of copper 2 sulfate will be equal to, so you get the mass of the copper 2 sulfate in the compound over the Mr of copper 2 sulfate pentahydrate, then you multiply by the 5.0 grams that they give you, because they just want you to calculate the mass of in this mass. So what is the Mr or the mass of copper 2 sulfate from the compound here? It is simply 160 over the total Mr. It is 250, then multiply by the 5.0 grams. So now if you notice, if you put that on the calculator, if you're following what I'm doing on the calculator, 160 over 250, then multiply by 5, which 5.0 is the same as 5. So don't worry about that. So you can see what it is giving you, 3.2 grams of copper 2 sulfate. So this is actually, in 5 grams, there's only 3.2 grams of copper. So if you wanted to know the water, you would have just said, 5 minus 3.2. That would have actually given you for water, which is 1.8, meaning that is the mass of the water that was in this mass, if they had asked you to do that. Thank you so much for watching. If you love what we do, please subscribe to our channel, and please, if you're struggling with more concept, go to the chemistry playlist. You'll be able to learn a whole lot of concept even on hydrates. If you're doing pure science or ordinary science, I've done a whole lot of that. Thank you so much for watching.